Hey everybody, and welcome back into the Knowledge Pool, a think tank of things Magic the Gathering. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Historic, a new format on Magic the Gathering Arena that encompasses the question of what to do with your cards after rotation hits. Now, depending on who you talk to, Historic is either a couple weeks old or a couple months old because it actually started at rotation of Eldraine. A lot of people were worried on Magic Arena that when a rotation hit, that their cards would just be whisked away. It seemed like they were doing that based on tests in Alpha and Beta when they had the Kaladesh stuff in, and then they just kind of got rid of it all. And people were worried that their cards weren't going to be worth anything after a rotation. The answer to this became Historic, which is everything that is on Arena, subtracting the Kaladesh block and those things. More on that in another video. And every time they rotate, they'll keep putting these cards, they'll keep these cards on the client in order to make Historic its own set. So it's everything that is on Arena. Plus, every once in a while, they're going to release a curated set of some cards in order to add to the dimension of Historic. They're from Magic's history. They're cards that people like. They're cards that people have put a lot of thought and effort into, and things that people want to see in the course of making decks and building strategies, things that really give Historic its own flavor. As an eternal format, things won't get rotated out of Historic. Things might get banned if they decide that things are too strong or not really, meeting the criteria that they need. But overall, anything goes with the cards that are within the format. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this format. This format's going to see a lot of videos in the future, I assume, depending on what people want to see and what kind of questions come out of it. But for now, we're just kind of dipping our toes into the pool. So, Historic as a meta currently in Magic Arena is fairly diverse. It's got a lot of pieces moving, and people are trying to figure out exactly how to, quote unquote, solve it. And the longer it remains unsolved, the more fun it is to play, because that means that there is diverse competition, different decks, and get to try a lot of things. I've only touched into Historic a little bit now. I've played through the anthology event that came out, where they were giving us special styles of certain cards from the anthology. I have the anthology set in front of us. This is 20 cards that are built specifically into Arena's format just to boost Historic. And it was really fun. And at first I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and I'll talk about that story in a little bit. But in general, it was nice to see that people weren't just gravitating toward one or two decks. Like there were definitely some heavy hitters, some solid competitors, but people were trying things that were outside the box. They were going for things that have been curated towards, and things that they thought would just work better, old standard decks that work better with new cards in it, or these curated cards, decks that see a lot of play in standard that they thought might work better with the older cards put in. And, in general, it was a really cool experience in the best of one format. I have not tried the best of three. Hopefully I'll get a chance to, and we'll do a video on that at some point. But in Best of One, it was really fun to just kind of see what was going on. So first I want to talk a little bit about these sub-themes and the things that they added in order to facilitate some curation. So I think the best place to start is probably in White, we might as well, with Serra Ascendant and Soul Warden. Serra Ascendant is a 1/1 lifelink for 1 that as long as you have 30 or more life, it gets +5/+5 and has flying. And Soul Warden is another creature that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. We've seen this before inside of Arena, inside of Standard, with Impersonator, and Impassioned Orator, I'm sorry, and other things like that. It's just whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Sounds great. So they threw Soul Warden in. Soul Warden is sort of the original, or the most well-known of these whenever another creature enters the battlefield, gain 1 life creatures. It's a 1/1 for 1, so it's very aggressively costed, and these two cards together help bring out the synergy of a deck that people usually call Soul Sisters, where you gain a bunch of life, you make sure that all your abilities focus on getting things for gaining life, and then you attack with your 6/6 or better flying Ascendants and win the game. And even if you can't win the game right away, you're not getting up to 30 life, your life gain is enough to kind of add an attrition level to your deck. And this deck is really fun, especially for new players, I think, to kind of get a bead on how to play Magic, because in general, you're just giving yourself more time to do more things. And the interactions in this deck are fairly good. You know, some people ran cards that's like, when you gain life, pay something, draw a card. Some people ran cards that just aggressively life gain. You run the new Ajani, which I knew there was a card I forgot to put over on the side of the screen. That is just the white Ajani that is aggressively good at life gain. And with these things in play, you can with these things in play, you can make sure that everything comes together and creates a cohesive deck. Also in White, they added night creatures you control have double strike, the Kinsbale Cavalier. Kinsbale Cavalier is a really good Kithkin Knight that had seen play quite a bit back when Bant Knights was a thing, and in general, like different Knight decks. In Eldraine, we got a suite of Knights to play. So Kinsbale Cavalier is kind of a way to expand that into the historic format. I didn't see a lot of people playing it, but me personally, I kind of have some interest in seeing this as a thing, maybe a Knight deck that focuses around Embercleave and this card. And even though Embercleave gives double strike, it would just be nice to have Knight creatures having double strike in general, you know, using Rimrock Knight to pump things that are already double strike and just focus fire in on your opponent. It sounds cool to me. I think it's a cool idea. I didn't see any of it, but I don't think that means that it didn't get play. I just didn't get to play a lot of games. So the White has given us a couple of decks just from 3 cards being added. It added some sweet packages to expanding out into historic. With Blue, we got a couple of cards. We got Distant Melody, choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type, and Treasure Hunt. I've not seen a lot of play with Distant Melody. I'm sure that it's for certain tribal decks. Maybe we'll be seeing some kind of fairy deck in the future, but I did not personally see a lot of play against Distant Melody. Treasure Hunt, I did see some play against, and I don't know much about this deck because sadly, every time I played it, it never got its feet off of the ground, so to speak. But what Treasure Hunt does, it says reveal top cards from your library until you reveal a non-land card. Then put all cards revealed this way into your hand. What it does is it plays a lot of land, and then it plays Treasure Hunt and some other threat. I did see someone try to use a Glinthorn Buccaneer as the other card. and it's a 2/4 with haste that whenever you discard a card, Glenhorn Buccaneer deals 1 damage to each opponent. So they played a couple of treasure hunts, they played 1 or 2 Glenhorn Buccaneers, and then they would intentionally draw their entire deck, or as much of their deck as they could, with treasure hunt, hoping to get 20 lands. And then you have to discard down at the end of the turn, and when you discard down, Glenhorn deals the damage to each opponent, and it creates this machine gun situation where it just peels away life. I love these kind of decks. They're silly, they're cool, they're not super effective, but they're fun. It's fun when you get a combo off like this, and even your opponent usually can't really be mad because it's such an inconsistent thing. You chalk it up and you move on to the next game. It's easily sideboarded against if you're playing best of 3. There's ways around this that just decimate it and cause it to go away. But in a best of 1 format, it's really funny to see, and it has its own sort of following. Cryptbreaker added a lot to the idea of running zombie tribal, especially I think as much as we're talking about historic, Brawl also has sort of a historic option, and getting to play Cryptbreaker into a zombie tribal Brawl deck is a lot more fun than it sounds. I know I haven't gone over Brawl. Maybe I'll do a video over it if people are interested. But if you don't know what Brawl is, it's sort of a Commander light format where everything's singleton. You have a commander, and you play through against someone. But it's supposed to be all standard. And with this historic option in Arena, it means that you can kind of expand that out a little bit to make it more like a commander situation than Brawl might normally be. So, but Cryptbreaker is great in zombie decks. It creates zombies for discarding cards. You get to tap 3 on tap zombies you control to draw a card and lose 1 life. So it gives you card draw. It gives you creature advantage. It's a very solid zombie card, and it helps round out some zombie decks. I saw a couple zombie decks during the historic event, and I felt like it's not a super strong deck yet, but I feel like a couple more good zombies come out in standard, and we'll see a turnaround on that. Maybe Theros will add something because of its Greek roots. We might be seeing some zombies coming out of that set, so here's hoping. Hypnotic Spectre also came out in black, and I did not see it in play, but it is one of my personal favorite cards. I am a black player, and it's just a 2/2 flyer that whenever it deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. And discarding a card at random is a big deal. And the idea that this is when it deals damage, not when it deals combat damage, means that you can tease it into decks that find ways to make creatures do damage to players without doing combat, so that you can really focus in hard on the discard. I like this kind of stuff. I think it's great. This is one of those cards that you see all the time in starting black decks, and I think that it's got a lot of things, and maybe there will be a discard suite eventually where that discard control really shines. Phyrexian Arena was also printed. Phyrexian Arena being a fairly popular black card. It's an enchantment. At the beginning of upkeep, you draw 1 card and lose 1 life. It just gives you card advantage at the cost of life, which if you're playing black, that's kind of the way you play anyway. Or, I mean, it's at least the way I play black. And it's a very solid card, and it adds to black's effectiveness inside the format. Tendrils of Corruption is a card that deals damage to target creature and gains X life, where X is the number of swamps you control. This is just decent creature removal for black. Right now, black's creature removal, in historic, it's better than it is in standard. because you get to use cards from the previous sets like Price of Fame. But personally, I feel like Black's removal has been lacking somewhat in recent years. And so being able to see a card that's just sort of a solid instant kill spell, plus, some life gain, it's another hit for that mono black deck that I really want to play, that I want to see within things, The next card, Kiln Fiend, I feel like it adds a lot to a deck that kind of already existed. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Kiln Fiend gets +3/+0 till end of turn. So it's a 1/2 for 2, which isn't that great. But whenever you play an instant or sorcery, it gets +3/+0. Well, that can go well with the elemental deck of Spitfire and using the enchantment Cavalcade, because it's a Cavalcade card. But then you swing with it, your Spitfires are getting bigger because of the 1 damages you're doing. And then you use cards like Shock, and you use cards like other burn spells, Pyrohelix, things like that. And while your Spitfire's getting bigger because you're dealing direct damage to the opponent, your Kiln Fiend is getting bigger because you're playing instants and sorceries, and they kind of tag team off of each other. It also has been showing a lot of play inside Izzet decks like Phoenix and Temur Reclamation in some senses, like not always, but sometimes, because it's just a solid creature that gets boosted by what you're already doing in the deck, playing instants and sorceries. I think that format is very, very close to being really, really good. What they need, in my opinion, is something that facilitates trample, because since this only gets +3 to power, the creature's fairly weak, and if your opponent has a blocker, you don't want to go up against them. So finding ways to make that be unblockable or to get damage through regardless of blocking is a good way to make that really work. But I love this card. Goblin Matron helped make goblins more playable in Historic. It's when she enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a goblin card, reveal that card, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. So it's a goblin tutor. That's what we call it when you get to search cards and put them in your hand. And so this goblin tutor that's on a 1/1 goblin, you can go get some more powerful goblins out of your deck and really just kind of lay waste. I played a couple of different goblin decks when I was playing in the event, and they're fairly consistent, and Goblin Matron is a big part of that because you can get the goblin that you need for the situation you're in. And creature heavy decks often have that issue, so Goblin Matron was a really good addition to this set. This one I really want to talk about because I really like this card. Hidetsugu's Second Right is a card. It's from, I believe, one of the Kamigawa blocks. I believe the first Kamigawa block. And it says if target player has exactly 10 life, Hidetsugu's Second Right deals 10 damage to that player. Now that sounds very, very situational, because it's like, oh, how am I going to make my opponent have exactly 10 life when I need them to have life? But I saw this card played very well with Torgar, Famine Incarnate, which is a 7/6 creature for 8, right? It sounds like a lot, but as an additional cost to cast a spell, you can sacrifice any number of creatures you control, and it costs 2 less. So you can get it down by sacrificing 3 creatures to just costing 2 black. And when he enters the battlefield, up to one target's player life total becomes half of their starting life total, rounded down. Well, in Historic, life totals are 20, so that means that he puts their life total at 10. A lot of people were playing decks that were playing like small black creatures, just kind of keeping the board full and in a place, and just keeping their opponent off of them and off balance for a little while. And then at some point when they had 6 mana, sack 3 creatures, play Torgar's Famine Incarnate for 2, and then pay 4 and use Hidetsugu's Second Right and just win the game on that one turn. It's a really interesting effect. I don't tend to play decks like that personally, but the ideas behind it are really solid, and it's cool to see a an effect kind of hit the board that feels good to play. And this is a sort of one of those feels good when it triggers abilities. So this deck got legs because Hidetsugu's Second Right came out. It's not that Torgara was a bad card necessarily, but without Hidetsugu's Second Right, it doesn't feel quite as formidable. So Elvish Visionary also came out, and Elves is what I played during the event, mostly because it's a fairly cheap build. I had already picked up the this little suite of cards when it came out, and then it gave me Elvish Visionary, it gave me Imperious Perfect, which I'll show you in a second. So I built what most people call the Elf Ball deck, which is just play a bunch of elves. Elves can make each other stronger, and then just swing out with a huge amount of elves. Elvish Visionary lets you draw a card, so in a creature heavy deck, again, it's good to have those resources where you get to draw cards. And I mean, drawing a card is the best thing in Magic. It's the 3 best words you'll ever see. So Elvish Visionary really facilitates that elf deck, as does Fauna Shaman, which is a 2/2 creature that lets you discard a creature card to search your library for a creature card and put in your hand. Again, this is called a tutor. So this tutor lets you tutor up different things, and this works really well in the elf deck, but it also works really well in any creature-based deck that you need a finisher in. Because if you're drawing low-level creatures in a green deck, but you want to be hitting your stompers, the things with trample, the things with big power, you can just tutor it up by discarding a creature that you don't care as much about. And with the ramp that exists within Historic because of Llanowar Elves and the various druids and all the different green ramp, you can get yourself up to a point where Fauna Shaman can do its work and get you something powerful to put down very, very early. So Fauna Shaman, also in my version of the Elf Ball deck, I think most of them run it just because it lets you get the elves that you need. Elves like Imperious Perfect, which gives other elves +1/+1 and helps you create elf warrior tokens. So it gives you more creatures on the board, more things to do. And I mean, overall, it's just it's so fun to kind of just play those strategies where you're just like creature. All of them are big, swing away. And I don't play those very often, but when I do, it's really fun. And Imperious Perfect helps you do that. There's also another elf lord, an elf that gives elves +1/+1 from a previous set that was in Standard that is now in Historic. And so you can run those in conjunction with this one, and it gives you the ability to just sort of really boost these small creatures into formidable threats. So that's what I played. I felt it was fairly successful, and I just think overall it's a very well-rounded deck that, because of this historic build, this anthology, it gave it some legs in this format. Burning Tree Emissary was added. Burning Tree Emissary is a 2-cost 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you get to add 1 red and 1 green to your mana pool. So it basically is free as long as you have something else to play. It's also good at mana fixing. So if you only have green on the field and you need 1 red to help you cast a spell, you can cast Burning Tree for 2 green and then add green and red, and now you can cast the spell that you need to play. Vice versa, if you only have red on the board and you need the green. So Burning Tree Emissary is one of those cards that people really like to see in formats because it gives the ability for decks like Gruul to do some fixing without having to run creatures that aren't quite as good. I think this was a great addition. It adds a lot to the Gruul deck. I did see a couple of Gruul decks, and Burning Tree Emissary did help my opponents eke out some wins sometimes. So it was pretty cool. Sisay was also added. Captain Sisay is a legendary creature that you can tap and search your library for a legendary card, reveal that card, and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. Sisay is a special tutor for legendary cards, and the word card there is so important, and it creates situations that you can do things that are pretty sick. So if you played in the last standard, you might know Kethis, but if you didn't, Kethis was a special deck that came out right at the end of M20 being the last set in rotation, and he gives legendary spells. You cast one, costs one less to play, one generic cost less to play, and you can exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard until end of turn. Each legendary in your graveyard gains, you may play this card from your graveyard. With Sisay that just got added, this combo became even better. And the combo, for those of you who don't know, it's a really long, complicated combo, but let's just say it involves milling yourself to get a bunch of good legendaries into the graveyard, and then using Kethis and another card to create an infinite mana combo so that you can play all of these legendaries onto the field. And maybe you're just trying to draw yourself out and win with an alternate win condition, or maybe you're trying to deck your opponent out. Maybe you're just trying to play a bunch of stuff that is really, really good and get it on the board, and then next turn just swing with a bunch of stuff. This works well with Super Friends, but what's good about this is that with Sisay, legendary spells isn't just legendary creatures. It's legendary artifacts, it's legendary enchantments, it's sagas, which are legendary, and it's planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are also legendary. So this gives you a lot of different things to work with, and this deck was decent in standard. It was pretty good. It fired off well. In historic, it's even better, and part of that reason is because Sisay allows you to search your library for the legendary you need to make that combo go off. And I think that's great. I think it's amazing to really get a deck that was already seeing some play and was kind of annoying but easily sideboardable against in standard, to just give it some really nasty teeth in the form of being able to get what it needs when it needs to get it. So Sisay was a great addition in that respect. Ornithopter was added. Ornithopter is a 0/0/2 with flying. It doesn't sound very good. Free cards are always good, and for people who haven't been playing Magic for the long history of Magic, whenever you get to play cards for free, it generally becomes a problem, and Ornithopter is no exception to that in the terms of the decks that it works well in, which are artifact decks. So they also added Mind Stone, which is an artifact that you can pay to put it on the field. It gives you 1 colorless mana, and you can pay a generic and tap and sack it to draw a card. So it can give you card advantage, it can give you mana ramp in a sense, and it's an artifact. And so the artifact decks that already existed with Steel Overseer and things that the different artifact creatures that came out, there's an Eldring blue card that I forgot to put up here that allows you to turn any artifact into a 4/4 artifact creature, and all of your artifact creatures gain flying off of him. So there's a bunch of different ways to kind of build up this deck, but Ornithopter is a good key card in that go wide, give things +1/+1 counters, and then swing with your free flyers that you got that are also artifacts to build up in the artifact field. And there's also another artifact that came out this time around called Darksteel Reactor. Darksteel Reactor is a 4-cost indestructible artifact, at the beginning of your upkeep, you can put a charge counter on it, and when this has 20 or more charge counters on it, you win. So these kind of cards create interesting combo decks, or decks that kind of focus on a theme of alternate win conditions. And this alternate win condition, in my mind, is so fun. I love putting out stuff like this, because once it's on the board, it's usually not going away. There are cards that can exile or make an opponent sacrifice artifacts, in which case, you got to make sure that you're playing the right deck around it. But with all of the proliferate stuff from the previous standard, it's really easy to get charge counters up on this kind of thing. So it starts with 1. Next turn, if you've been playing your cards right, maybe you've got 4 on it, and you keep gaining that advantage, and you try to get that clock to go off as quickly as possible. In the meantime, you keep your opponent off balance with whatever creatures or control you happen to be running. I love this for best of 1, because most people don't play exile artifact effects or sacrifice artifact effects in their main board. And so it really gives you something to play with in a best of 1 kitchen table situation. And it's super fun. It's something to try. And I think just the way that I'm talking about it should let you know, like, how exciting it is to have more options. And on top of that, there are cards like Nexus of Fate, which was restricted or banned in best of 1 in standard because of how good it was. It's getting to see play again because of this historic format. I don't think it's very fun to play in best of 1, but it's still banned in best of 1. I believe in historic, but it's also in best of 3. It's not so broken. I don't know the exact card combinations. I can figure that out at some point if someone wants me to go through a deck analysis of it. But in general, having all these options, all the different decks that I talked about, that's just a scratch of the surface of the different things that you could be playing within this format. And just having the ability to play in a format like that is really exciting. There are downsides. One of the biggest downsides being not having cards ahead of time. I am a player who's been playing for a long time, or playing Magic in general for a long time. But when it comes to Arena, I started playing in M20. And so my not collected cards is a fairly large percentage of what is in Arena's suite of things to play. I have almost no cards from the first 3 sets on Arena, the Ixalan block. And I'm still missing a fair few cards from the Guilds of Ravnica stuff, even though my drafting has made it so that it's a little easier to kind of fill out those newer fields, the ones that are in standard. So I'm hoping that at some point they'll do some drafting for historic sets, go back and let us draft Ixalan, let us draft M19, and pick up stuff that we might have missed by not playing it the first time around. But overall, I really like that there's stuff to do, and there's something for those players who have been playing since the last standard and have all these cards sitting around and the things that they can do. At some point, if we do another video on this, you guys can tell me what you want to talk about. We could definitely talk about some more of the potential problems of playing historic, the kind of things that you want to know before getting into Eternal formats. We can talk about anything you want to see. So thank you for listening to what ended up being a much longer video than I was expecting. We appreciate you guys checking out our content. Be sure to like, subscribe if you want to see stuff. Leave comments in the description about what you think about historic, about your thoughts on what you want to see us talk about next. I'm Dish. Thank you for visiting the Knowledge Pool, and we'll see you soon.